Welcome everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are right now. I'm Home Healthcare News Editor Bob Holly, and I'll be moderating today's discussion all about identifying and addressing caregiver churn in home care. A few housekeeping items before we begin and I introduce our expert speakers for today. First, please note that your audio has been muted. That's to ensure sound quality. We can't hear you, but if you did have any questions, make sure you send those our way using the question function on your screens. Throughout the discussion, I'm going to be keeping my eye on that. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can. We do have a dedicated portion towards the end of the webinar to answer any remaining questions. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so if you miss anything, don't worry, we have your back. All attendees will receive a copy of the presentation and the recording of the webinar following its conclusion. Lastly, a big thank you to AlayaCare for bringing this conversation together. Okay, so caregiver churn in home care, that's our focus for today. And I want to start out by clarifying, when we say home care, think generally. We're not just talking about private pay or one specific segment. We're really talking about the entire home-based care landscape. As it has been for years, caregiver churn is a significant pain point for providers of all shapes and sizes that remains as true in 2021 as it did in 2020 and the year before. Here at Home Healthcare News, despite the PPE challenges, the financial challenges, and all the other challenges related to COVID-19, providers still tell us that churn and just being able to keep your employees is one of their #1 roadblocks to growth. It's the thing that really keeps a lot of folks up at night. So who do we have joining us for today's discussion? First, we have Aaron Dunn, SVP of Marketing at CareAcademy. Aaron, thanks for being here. We also have Naomi Goldapple, head of AlayaCare's Alaya Labs. Naomi, thank you for your time today. And last but not least, we have Brett Kerhofer, Associate Director of Sales at Hireology. I'm talking to you based in Chicago. Brett's not too far away, so Brett, we're neighbors for the webinar today.
Sounds great.
Thank you all for joining today. I thought before we dive in, you could each maybe just briefly introduce yourselves and say a quick word about your organizations. Aaron, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me today. Aaron Dunn. I head up marketing here at CareAcademy and a whole bunch of other initiatives. For those of you who aren't familiar, CareAcademy is one of the leading providers of training and compliance management, workforce management software for home care, home health agencies. I've been around for a few years now, and it's really been an exciting time to be part of the business and part of the market. So I'm excited to join you all today.
Yeah, it seems like we cover you guys almost on a weekly or bi-weekly basis these days.
That'd be great.
And Naomi, can you tell me a little bit about your role at Alaya Labs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the head of Alaya Labs. Alaya Labs, we are really the R&D arm of AlayaCare. So we leverage emerging technologies to be able to make sure that our platform is the most innovative out there. So emerging, I mean by, machine learning, optimization algorithms, natural language processing. So we'll talk about some of that today. And definitely in the labs, we've been concentrating on this problem of caregiver churn and retention and how we can be more data driven to help our clients. And AlayaCare is a company that has end-to-end software for the home care industry.
Well, we are going to dig into all of the interesting things that you're doing related to churn during this discussion. But before we do, Brett, tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do at Hireology.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having us. So Hireology is an applicant tracking software, been around about 10 years, and the industries that we focus on and we serve are industries where people are essentially the product. And I don't think there's any better representation in the home care industry for that. So my role here at Hireology, I'm the Associate Director of Sales. I oversee our healthcare division, a division that we've been working in since about 2014. So about the last 7 years we've been focusing there. So excited to be on the panel today.
Thank you all for those introductions. It definitely saved me the effort from introducing you all. All right, let's go to the next slide. And I will very quickly give an overview of today's discussion. First, we're going to recap some very interesting survey results talk about the current state of the home care industry and churn at a glance. After that, we're going to dive into a thought leader Q&A. And then toward the end of the webinar, we're going to turn to our audience, maybe answer a little bit of audience Q&A. But again, send those questions to me in real time because we could sprinkle them throughout the webinar too if anything really relevant to the topic at hand comes up. All right, so this information comes from the 2021 Home Care Employee Retention Survey report brought to you by AlayaCare and Home Healthcare News. This really paints a picture of where the home care industry is with churn, and it'll give you a good sense of just how big of a challenge that it is before we jump into our discussion. As you can see, caregiver churn remains a significant pain point for providers in 2021. While caregiver shortages and the business impacts of COVID-19 were the most often cited pain points in our survey, caregiver churn was a close third issue for providers this year. Caregiver churn is a bottom line disruptor for in-home care businesses. And a lot of times providers are willing to spend oftentimes big to fix their churn issues. 80% of our survey respondents, 80%, 8 in 10, said that caregiver churn is disruptive to their bottom line, their business's bottom lines. And nearly 60%, well over half, said that they're willing to invest in solutions that address the problem of caregiver churn. Of those who say that they are willing to invest, the vast majority say that that investment is a high or medium priority for their businesses. Without a doubt, churn was made worse by the pandemic for most providers. It was a very difficult time, especially for frontline caregivers. About 60% of respondents said that employee churn increased within their organizations as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, while about a third, 34%, reported no significant change. A lot of things factor into that, I'm sure. Personal risks that employees are willing to take, burnout, potential family conflicts with kids being home from school, government-supported benefits, and several other variables. All right, so what else did our survey find? The AlayaCare HHCN survey shows that training and development is the highest area of focus among providers working to drive employee retention. More than 40% of our survey respondents said that they are focused on training and development. That's followed by things like scheduling and communication solutions as areas of focus. One final key takeaway to help lay the foundation for the discussion coming up: pay and benefits, lack of hours and or inconsistent hours, and safety concerns amid the COVID-19 pandemic were the 3 most common reasons for employee churn, according to the respondents of our survey. Those were followed by demanding and or physical work, commute or travel requirements, and a lack of training. So again, training coming up. All right, so that's the foundation. Let's now circle back and hear from our expert speakers for today. And I think we'll start with this question for everyone. 60% of our respondents say churn had increased as a result of COVID-19. What would you say are some low-hanging fruits for organizations to focus on right now to curb employee churn? Naomi, let's hear from you first.
Okay, great. You know, the low-hanging fruit is always to look at the facts, and the facts are always like, what does the data say? So I think there could be you know, anecdotal evidence in terms of why do we think people are churning, but sometimes you're surprised when you actually dig into the data and you find out, why are they churning and what are some patterns in the data? So I know that we've discovered some interesting, like, low-hanging fruits from the data, things that they could attack right away. Obviously, there's some issues that are harder in terms of, increasing pay, in terms of, changing their particular situations at their homes. Those are difficult ones to tackle. But when we see things like, that the the hire, if there's a big lag between the date that they're hired and when they get their first shift, if that's too long, they have a tendency really to churn. So if we can have that data at our fingertips and be able to monitor exactly what they're doing in the first 30, 60, 90 days, make sure that they have shifts very soon, make sure that they feel like they're part of the fold, make sure that they're being onboarded properly, that can do wonders. So really the low-hanging fruits is dig into the data and make sure that you can pick off some of the easier ones to handle just by having that data at your fingertips.
I think to me, one of the key examples of separating anecdotes from data-driven trends has to do with compensation. Everybody thinks that compensation is the only thing that factors into churn when it's one important thing among many, many, many important things. Brett, I saw you nodding your head when Naomi brought up the point between or about the lag between somebody being a new hire and starting their first shift. What are some of the low-hanging fruits that providers can take to reduce churn in your perspective?
Yeah, I think Naomi hit the nail on the head there with the lag time. One thing that we've been talking to our customers a lot about is digital onboarding. That obviously speeds up the time to get somebody onboarded. When they feel onboarded, they feel connected to the organization, and the sooner they can get onboarded, the sooner they can take shifts. That's what everyone's talking about. I think, you asked about concerns about safety and uncertainty surrounding COVID-19, ensuring employees that you're doing what's in their best interest as well, and not unnecessarily putting them in harm's way is super important in today's, applicant-driven economy. So think, are you training employees on proper sanitation protocols? Are you providing them with the appropriate PPE to enter the workplace or patient home? Sort of overemphasizing and over communicating the importance of them being safe will get them more eager and more excited to come work for your organization.
Thank you. And Aaron, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really would echo what Naomi and Brett both had to say. The one thing I would say that as you dig into the data, though, is to just be a little bit careful about a one-size-fits-all approach. I think when we think about low-hanging fruit and thinking about how to apply, I think it's really great to look into the data and figure out, like, what are the cohort of people that this would apply to the most. But I think as was alluded to, everybody's situation might be a little bit different. Some people clearly are balancing, multiple jobs. They have their job they're getting paid for, and then they have their home job and their parent job, and some folks are also family caregivers and dealing with some of those situations. So being flexible to understand and meet caregivers where they're at and understanding what their individual needs are. Obviously, if you can bucket those into groups, then that's fantastic. But being flexible to really understanding what those challenges are. And then, obviously, I completely agree with the idea of supporting people through their journey, making sure that, from onboarding through, hopefully never offboarding, but making sure that you're providing them with the skills, the supports they need to be successful. And those are changing, right? In March and April last year, it was information, it was flexibility, it was PPE. More recently, that's shifted around to more information around vaccines and vaccine delivery and kind of what that means from supporting your clients. And then I'm sure it'll evolve again as we move into this next new normal. But I think flexibility is the operative word for 2021 and 2.
And I know that's something that CareAcademy has been working pretty actively on, is vaccine hesitancy among caregivers, right?
That's right. Yeah, thanks. We heard this very clearly starting back in the end of last year. Certainly there is a number of reasons for vaccine hesitancy, or the term that we started to adopt around vaccine skepticism. And some of that is driven by more systemic issues, and some of that is driven by kind of where people are at the moment. So we put together a free class on our website that was to help educate caregivers on the vaccine. We did a webinar specifically around helping address vaccine skepticism within your caregiver population. Done quite a bit of content on it deliberately, because we know this is a big issue, and it's also a big issue for you as agency operators, and thinking about how you support both your caregivers but also support your clients. So it's a big important issue for sure right now.
Yeah. Brett, I want to aim this question, at least to start, toward you and Hireology. With caregiver shortages and caregiver churn being such a pain point for home care operators right now, you mentioned digital onboarding or virtual onboarding, but what else can agencies do to improve the hiring process overall, which can translate to employees sticking around longer?
Yeah, I think the implications here are that in order to remain competitive in the job market, you're going to have to tackle and address this problem head on. So start by providing a much better experience for your job seekers. I think we can all think back to a time you were seeking employment and you had an absolutely terrible experience, or maybe the recruiter didn't get back to you for days, potentially weeks. I think everybody, has been in that boat. So put yourself in that situation, and this is your opportunity to provide a better experience for other job seekers. What we understand is that not everyone will be a good fit for your organization, and that's okay. But you and your team have the ability to tactfully engage with those applicants and allow them to move on to another opportunity that they may be a better fit for. You need to treat people with respect, because word of mouth does travel fast in this industry, and you want to maintain that great employment brand as you look to fill your open roles. So this mindset will also permeate through your organization and send a message to your current employees. And like we talked about, happy and proud employees tend to stay longer. I think another way to tackle this problem is to improve your velocity to hire. For example, if you can cut your existing hiring process, let's say from 14 days down to 10 days, you're already making yourself more competitive and getting job seekers to work faster. The job seekers that we want to attract are looking for an employer that aligns with their own values and can get them to work quickly. And this ties back to providing excellent experience for applicants, which in turn plays into that employee retention that we talked about. I think last, what I'll say is you want to blend the use of technology with a little bit of a human touch. So technology can make you and your team more efficient as you refine certain tasks within your hiring process. However, as is becoming a theme with my long-winded answer here, a human touch throughout the entire hiring process allows you to connect with applicants on a more personal level, which further enhances their job seeking experience. So remember, we're competing for a limited amount of talent currently, so being a memorable employer for your job seekers is of the utmost importance.
Brett, I actually have a follow-up question from our audience here. This goes back to digital systems for onboarding. Somebody's asking, have you heard any stories, or has anybody else noticed about digital onboarding systems and maybe some difficulties with completing them or going through the process actually derailing prospective candidates?
Yes, absolutely. Once March 2020 hit, companies were focused on, I can't bring somebody in, fill out manual paperwork anymore. They don't want to do that. So how do I get them onboarded, up and running in a safe capacity? Turning to digital onboarding solutions was the way to go. And our biggest focus was getting them to be on a process that is repeatable compliance, and really in your onboarding solutions, you should look for two things. You need it to be mobile friendly. People want to fill their forms out on their phone these days, and there's a lot of good solutions out there that can allow for that. And second, you want a guided experience. A lot of companies do PDF upload, where we sort of put the responsibility on the candidate to make sure they're filling out all the forms in the right places, signing all the right signatures. But a guided experience and leveraging a software that has that makes sure that employees do not skip any steps. We see completion rates at 100%, and providing them with an experience that shows them exactly where to sign and guides them through the whole process will not only give them a great experience, but make sure that all the forms are being filled out correctly.
Naomi, my next question is going to be for you, but before we get there, just wanted to ask if you or Aaron wanted to follow up to anything that Brett just said.
I did, actually. I don't know what your next question is, but I'll answer. I'll follow up this one. What I think is the way we think about it a bit is kind of even before you start with your hiring processes, you have to set yourself up for success. So what we help some of our clients do is look historically at what worked well in the past. So what types of caregivers have stuck around the longest, and why? So what are some of the characteristics that we've seen that are predictors of success? So when you see, maybe some that we've hired that have come from certain colleges, that have come from certain recruitment processes have worked out better than others. We see certain age categories definitely work better than others. So being very mindful of what has worked well in the past will kind of reduce some effort at the front end of the funnel, so that you're at least targeting the right ones in the first place. So that's one. And then in terms of retention, definitely making sure that you can onboard them seamlessly, make sure they feel like they're in the fold, and then keeping track of things like, we worked with one customer who said, they think that the number of minutes that their caregivers are on hold when they call into head office really frustrates them if they're on for a very long time, and therefore we have to make sure that we monitor that, because we know that that's a source of frustration and that leads to people dropping off. So trying to pinpoint what has worked well in the past and what are some key indicators that we really have to keep a pulse on to make sure that we retain them.
I feel like identifying those labor pools that have worked well in the past is more important now than even in years prior to 2021, because there are new types of workers interested in home care. Just as other industries maybe experience job loss, you're seeing people migrate into this profession. And I know after economic hardship, some people in non-service driven jobs, they want to feel that sense of like mission and purpose, and they get interested in going into home care. So I definitely agree that is a really important point, especially today. Aaron, anything that you wanted to add?
I think it's been well covered. The only thing I would add is signaling is part of that recruitment process, particularly for people who are coming outside of the industry, signaling that you have a robust program, that once you onboard them, that you're not just going to kind of walk away and say good luck. And of course, training is a key component to that, but so is also mentorship, support, making sure that you're available to them, and then that they're positioned to be successful on day one and also day 91. I think is really critical, and signaling that even way up the funnel in the recruitment process will help people feel comfortable that your organization is going to be a good partner for them as they go through their journey.
We have a comment here from somebody in the audience just saying that the period between onboarding and the start date is very memorable. So make sure you give those prospective new hires a better experience that they've had in the past. All right, Naomi, that question I left you in suspense for. The vast majority of our survey respondents, they said that they were willing to invest to address caregiver churn. What projects are you and your team at Alaya Labs working on, and what trends have you been seeing that shed light on the value of data science and improving employee retention? I know you just talked about that a little bit with identifying important areas to focus on.
Yeah, I think so. What concretely, what we've been delivering is really really like a retention dashboard. So making this so that the schedulers or HR, whoever it is in your organization that will be using it, really has that data at their fingertips. One of the areas specifically that we worked with one of our validation partners was coming up with this idea of a satisfaction score for each caregiver. So the hypothesis here was that if my caregivers are satisfied, then they are going to be loyal and they are going to stay around. So what drives satisfaction? And this is where Aaron was saying, like, we don't want to overfit to, you know, one particular client. So we try to make sure that we're looking at the data for each of our clients as we're working with them. And, you know, some they think what drives satisfaction, mostly the thing that drives satisfaction is utilization. So am I getting enough hours to basically feed my family? Is this enough to be a full job so that I can make the money that I need to make? So that's very important. Then there's things like, how far do I have to travel during the day? You know, definitely pay. Then there's other things like, what kind of quality shifts am I getting? There's different types of criteria depending on who we're working with. So we basically take all of those factors, all of those different variables, and throw them into a model. And this model then gives a score. And so what we do is we have this score for every employee for every single day, monitoring how they're doing. So you can actually see their trends. So you can see, this particular customer, or this particular client, this particular employee, sorry, is they're trending up. So we see that their satisfaction has really gone up the past while, or this one, it's gone down. I want to see why. So you can actually look into those variables and see what is driving that. And one of the very low-hanging fruits that we discovered at the beginning is we found a bunch of the employees actually had scores of 0. And you're like, why would they have a 0? And sometimes because they haven't had a shift in the past 3 months, but nobody really realizes it, right? So we call these a bit like the flatliners, where they may have like kind of checked out, where they have actually taken another job, they're doing something else, they're still on the roster, but they're not actually contributing. And so this is an opportunity to look at your scores and kind of take your bottom 10% and basically call them up and be like, hey, either try and resurrect and get them back onto the roster, or find out why they haven't been working. And most of our, we've seen the data, we've seen that they've been able to, you know, convert those zeros, either literally take them off the roster because they have actually checked out, or convert them back into a full-fledged working member of the workforce. So it's been kind of a simple metric, but extremely effective, and it's a daily actionable metric. And then we have sort of a broader suite of retention metrics. Some of the things that I alluded to before. We've found correlations between, you know, clock-ins. If people consistently clock in late, sometimes that is a predictor that they are starting to lose interest, and they're gonna be a candidate for churning. We've seen things in terms of age categories. We've seen things in terms of what types of services they're giving. So having those important metrics at their fingertips really helps to be able to make those daily decisions. Some of them are more planning decisions, like in terms of, you know, okay, we're going to go out recruiting. Let's look at the data for the past quarter and let's make a decision. But some of them are very actionable on a daily basis, and we find that they're finding that extremely useful to have that front and center.
Some of the things that you're talking about too, I know we're focusing on retention, but it seems like they could be very valuable for recruiting as well. For example, if you had a 0 that you were able to bring back to like a 5, make them more engaged, they, I feel like, could go to their peers and be like, yeah, you know, this provider is really making an effort to make sure I have some shifts. And that could go a long way to maybe attracting new employees.
Absolutely. I think the philosophy was that, you know, there's always the squeaky wheels that will literally call and say, I don't like my schedule. But for, you know, the 5 that call, there's probably another 20 that are just, you know, silently drifting away, right, and becoming disengaged. So being able to bubble that information up, it makes it very actionable, and you can have retention interventions to be able to act on that.
So we talked about some low-hanging fruit, some things that providers could immediately do to improve churn rates at their operations. We all know that the demand for in-home care is skyrocketing. The need for qualified caregivers is likewise skyrocketing. What could home care providers do in the next 2 to 3 years to position themselves for that demand, maybe bring their churn down a little bit? And then how does technology play a role in that? I think this is a big picture question that will open up to the floor again. Aaron, let's maybe hear from you first, and then go to Brett, and then Naomi, you last.
That's a big question, Bob. I think everybody on this call certainly is feeling the crunch. If you are the lucky few who feel like you've got more caregivers than you need, then there's several hundred other people on this call who want to talk to you right now. It'll take them off your hands, I'm sure. And there's definitely some systemic issues that we as an industry need to continue to working on, and certainly President Biden's infrastructure bill and the addition plan, I should say, and the addition of potentially as much as $400 billion to really address some of these issues will go a long way to help. And we're already seeing some of those conversations actually happening in state senates and even potentially at the U.S. Congress. And I think those are really critical. But those are long-term solutions. Those changes don't happen tomorrow. Those happen over many years. So what can we do right now? I think one of the things that we have to do right now is certainly something that we and others in the industry have been talking about for a while, is thinking about home care as a key component of the healthcare continuum. Not just necessarily this afterthought, post-acute thing that happens, but really understanding home care's place in the complete healthcare continuum. And the market forces are in our favor here. We have been talking here at CareAcademy about how care broadly, healthcare is moving to the home, full stop. Right? The pandemic has accelerated that challenge. You can't read the HHCN newsletter daily without seeing somebody, who is doing hospital at home or, skilled nursing at home. And so this trend is here, it's happening. And so that is elevating the home care's role for sure. It was also about professionalizing our approach to our workforce and thinking about how what other businesses that we are now competing with workers for, as Amazon put the stake in the ground, $15 an hour minimum wage anywhere in the country. Costco, I think, said $16. McDonald's is coming up. Like wage increases are happening across the industry, and we know that it's not always possible for us just to raise wages. Again, one of those systemic issues. But there are other things that we can do to think about what are traditional employers, if you will, doing to engage a workforce and bringing some of those tactics into our industry as well. One of those is near and dear to our heart, of course, is training. And if a Starbucks can offer a training program for their baristas that includes college credit, then we should be able to do the same. And that's something that we just launched a couple weeks ago, which is an innovative partnership with SNHU, where caregivers taking CareAcademy classes that they need to do for you can actually also receive college credit currently through SNHU for those classes. That's just one step. I mean, there's probably 500 steps that we should be doing as an industry. But thinking about and borrowing from other industries is a critical thing that I think we can do now, while other things take years to work through.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Brett, anything that you'd like to add to what Aaron just said, or a completely different topic that you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, it's something we talk a lot about when I think about the preparing for the rising demand of caregivers. I think three important things come to mind. They're things that can be implemented relatively quickly, and they're all centered around the candidate experience. So number one, get your job descriptions in order. So make sure you're clearly describing the key skills and experience required for the job to make them SEO friendly. If you leave out key details, even the more challenging aspects of the job, it's likely that you will contribute to the turnover problem and hear that justification that the job was just different from what the employee expected. So making sure those job descriptions are clear, they're SEO friendly, is going to really help with that. I think the second thing is around employment branding. So enhance that career site where job seekers want to go to learn more about your business. When there's intense competition for that top talent, especially with today's applicant economy, you need to do everything you can to stand out beyond just offering benefits and competitive pay. So showcasing what makes working for you so great, highlighting things like culture, flexible hours. If you can offer career progression opportunities, highlight those on your careers page. I think the third is we talked about it a little bit earlier, but revisit that onboarding process. At a time when it's really, really hard to attract top talent, you need to do everything you can to get your new hires off on the right foot from day one. So creating an engaging, structured, and informative onboarding process that gets new employees excited to work for you and sets them up for success in their specific role. Studies show that employees that undergo effective onboarding are much more likely to stick around long term.
Thank you, Brett. Naomi, same big picture question to you. The demand for in-home care is skyrocketing. We need more caregivers. How do providers make sure that the caregivers that they have today stay with them?
Yeah, so I think I'll take a bit of a different tangent and focus a bit on the technology that I think will really help over the next couple of years. So one of them is definitely all about efficiency. So we heard that the number 2 reason why they don't stick around is because of their scheduling, right? So they don't like their schedules. Their schedules either they're not convenient or they're not getting enough hours. So this is an area that we spend a lot of time on, which is all about travel and schedule optimization. So if you can provide efficient schedules, and if part of what you are trying to optimize is the utilization of your employees, then you can be much more efficient and you can automatically make sure that they are going to be satisfied with one of the main drivers of their satisfaction once they're actually in the role. So we look at helping to reduce travel time, make sure they get the hours that they need, and make sure that the coordinators have that decision support at their fingertips to be able to put the right person in the right role that is the best match and that is the most efficient on both sides. So that's definitely, we feel like employee churn and scheduling optimization are inextricably linked because one definitely affects the other. So that's a huge area. The other one I would look at, which is again something that we think about a lot and that we're doing a lot of research on, is this whole idea of risk. We want, the caregivers want to feel like they are indeed improving patient outcomes, right? That is the goal overall. And if we can provide tools to them, decision support, so that they feel well trained, but they also have decision support at their fingertips to do their job well, that will help with their satisfaction. So things like, giving them alerts when a patient is potentially at risk for rehospitalization, at risk for falls, at risk for wounds, being able to give them tips on what they should be doing for this particular patient so that the outcomes will be maximized. So this is where we use machine learning and some of the artificial intelligence approaches to be able to take all of that data, some of this unstructured and structured data, to be able to kind of build risk models and then give them concrete actions to be able to mitigate these risks. So I think that's an area where, again, using all the data that we're collecting to be able to give decision support to everybody along that chain will help to empower everybody in that chain and will lead to better retention.
And Naomi, while we are still with you, we do have a question from the audience specifically for you. The tool that you were describing earlier that helps measure employee satisfaction, somebody wants to know, does that take into account self-reported data? Could you maybe compare what an employee says their satisfaction is with what their satisfaction probably actually is?
It can. The beauty of it is that the variables that you put into it are agency specific. So it's really, we usually start off with something called like a hypothesis jam, where we basically try and get out of you, what do you think drives the churn? And we put the variables that you think are important in there. So if one of them is the self-reported or self-assessment, self-reported satisfaction, then that could be a variable within that model. That's a very interesting idea, actually, to be able to see if there's dissonance between the two.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, we are going to transition to audience Q&A at this point. And I selfishly want to kick off audience Q&A with a question from me. As we were talking through a lot of these, I was just reflecting on some of the conversations that I've had with employers over the past year. there have been so many home care providers that invested in employee retention programs and training programs and mentorship programs and technology since last spring, because they knew that it was crunch time and they had to keep their workers. Do you think as the pandemic situation and landscape improves, we'll start to see some employers maybe pump the brakes a little bit and think like, okay, you know, the worst is over, I could go back to doing whatever I was doing before? Or do you think that the narrative has kind of permanently changed and people realize just how important it is to keep their folks? Aaron, let's maybe start with you.
Sure. I sure hope not. Not for my business sake, but I just think for the sake of efficiency and growth. You know, one of our customers recently, you know, shared their experience of moving from a completely physical training program approach to one that was necessitated to be online by the pandemic, and how they're like, we're never going back. You know, they were sort of a rural area, and they had one person who was doing live training, and they were cycling around and trying to, you know, once a month they would do different trainings, you know, live trainings in different places, and they were losing candidates because the candidate didn't want to wait for the next training to come up. And it also put a ton of risk on their training initiative, and also that hire. Like, well, if I'm gonna invest all the time in that hire and making sure they get to a physical training and the cost of that physical training, you know, they better be good. They found they've actually been able to open up their aperture, you know, much more widely in the types of candidates that they can bring in as a result, because it's just much more efficient, and the cost per new hire is substantially lower. It also allows them to engage their current caregiver direct care workforce in ongoing training and upskilling training, and providing them with additional supports to address more complex, you know, disease conditions, you know, dementia care or Parkinson's or stroke, where you might have a very specific skill set that's required. And because they can now deliver all that online, you know, then their care staff can take the classes whenever they want. They don't need to try to bring people to the office once a month to do that kind of work. And so it's been incredibly efficient. I certainly recognize that you know, some types of trainings people feel like, you know, I got to be able to put hands on, and we recognize that. And I think that you know, a lot of that work will continue, but I don't know. I think that unfortunately these are the kinds of things that create really dynamic changes in markets. We've seen this in all technology in all markets for the last 100 years. I can't imagine we're going back to the way it was. And if we do, I feel like we've missed a huge opportunity. Don't ask me how I feel about live events, by the way. I feel the same way.
Brett, Naomi, your thoughts on whether some of maybe the advances that we took on the retention front in 2020 in early 2021 will go away in the future, or whether that the narrative has totally changed. Brett, let's start with you.
I'd say if you're an owner and you plan to take them away, you're not planning for success. The caregiver retention and turnover issue is not just an issue that came about via COVID. It's been here for years, and it will likely be here for years after COVID is done. So people that invest in employee retention programs now need to continue that going forward, because it's not like, you know, the clouds are going to go away and the sun's going to come out and everything's going to be dandy. It's just not going to happen. Turnover and retention will be a problem. It will likely get better, but it will be a problem for this industry for a long time. So the owners that have a focus on employee retention and employee programs are going to be the ones that win. You know, our CEO Adam always says that oftentimes in businesses, the people cost are the biggest cost for these companies, and yet it's often an area that they sometimes neglect. So in you know, engaging and investing in employee retention programs are the way going forward, and it should happen now, and it should continue in years to come.
Naomi, I feel like Brett just dropped the mic there a little bit, but anything to add to that?
Very briefly, I think, you know, if there's one sort of positive side of this pandemic, was the light that was shown on home care, on the entire industry, where, you know, a lot of people didn't know what the home care industry was prior to the pandemic, right? And it really elevated that, especially as the dangers of the long-term care came into light and people wanting to bring their loved ones back home. So I think the existence of it and all that definitely it's it's on the stage, which is a good thing. But I think also the velocity in which the pandemic kind of came upon us forced everybody to be a lot more resourceful and find other ways to deliver care. So I think some of the processes that are now delivered virtually are going to stay that way. And that was like a forcing function, right? Like, so I know within AlayaCare, we had to, I think it was within 4 weeks, we had up a module to be able to do, virtual care meetings, which, that was on the roadmap for further along, but it had to happen right away. And now realizing, what, some of these we can actually keep them virtual. And so that saves time, and therefore you can be more efficient. And so I think some of those are going to be very positive. And therefore I think constantly improving will stay there. I don't think people are going to be all of a sudden everything's back to normal. I think they're going to take some of these learnings and keep going forward with them.
And I guess if you did find some of these learnings increased your ability to be more efficient now, you could take those savings and invest them in further retention programs. And hopefully it's almost like a cycle that just repeats itself. All right, we have about 15 minutes left, and we have a lot of questions from the audience. So we'll get to as many as we can here in kind of like a lightning round. Let's start with this one. And Naomi, let's maybe stick with you. And then Brett, I also feel like this could be, well, it's a good question for everyone. The question is, how do you deal with not top-notch caregivers? Maybe they frequently call in late or they call out when you're in desperate need for staff. Is it worth trying to retain those people who aren't your top-notch caregivers?
I would say this is, I think, more of a personal opinion, but I would think not, because they, if they are not, from what the data has shown too, if they are showing those signs and symptoms, then they will not have good visits, and therefore they will not deliver good service, and therefore you're not going to get good NPS from your customers, and it's going to bring everything down. So that is usually not best. So either there can be retraining to be able to bring them back into the standard that has to be there, or it's best to sunset and look to recruit more that fit within the standards that you're looking for.
And that really goes back to the point that you made earlier too, is take a look at your data, take a look at what's really valuable, and make sure that's where your resources are going. Aaron, Brett, anything else to add to that?
I would just say start by asking why. And I think, we're all humans, and, so there could be something going on. And to Naomi's point, perhaps there's something that you can address. Maybe it's the training, maybe it's flexibility, and then go from there. In a resource constrained world, it's really hard to support underperforming employees, particularly since, they go directly to your billable, weekly billable hours. So sometimes I think we all feel like, we should be able to make it work for everybody. But at some point, if you've asked the questions and you've done the research and done the remediations, then perhaps you have to move on.
And Brett, anything else that you'd like to add to that one?
Yes, if you have an employee who is not in or disengaged, I think you can look at it one or two ways. If it's a skill issue, there are ways to level them up. There's ways to invest in them, get them trained, get them the help they need. But having an honest conversation about what they want out of the role and whether or not they're engaged in the role is super important. If they come back to you and say this just isn't for me, or you get that feeling that they're just not in it, that's it's sometimes okay. I think an important thing to say is that it's almost times it's better to have the seat unfilled than have the wrong person in that seat. The wrong person in that seat is just continuing a problem the company. So I'd rather have someone to be move on and refill that position than have someone in the seat who's not a good fit and that's dragging down your organization.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all for fielding that one. Another question from the audience. We talked a lot about communication between agency and caregiver. What about communication between caregiver and the family, or the family and the agency? Could software or could apps that improve communication with the client's family help with retention? Is that something that anybody has observed? Naomi, I see you raising your hand.
Have an answer to that one. Yeah, so we have something that we recently launched, which is called the Family Portal, and that is to address that specifically, so that it's not just a conversation between the agency and the adult daughter, or the whoever's the main caregiver, but that the family can be involved, and this can go on, and you can see when are the next appointments, what is the medication, everyone can see if the right medication is being taken, what are some of the latest notes, and then you can also communicate back and forth if there's any issues with the with the match. So this is extremely important to be able to I think offload some of the pressures that one family member sometimes takes on to be able to kind of orchestrate everything. So I think the software really helps to give the possibility for everybody to participate in the process. And it takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village to take care of vulnerable members of our families.
Mm-hmm. Aaron or Brett, anything to add before we move on to our next audience question? All right, well, perfect. I think this is a really good question too. Somebody I think is asking from a relatively small startup home care business. They want to invest in their retention efforts, but they said the needed technology can sometimes be expensive. Sometimes there could be cost considerations. How do you begin looking at where you make your first investment? Yeah, I guess where do you start if you're doing this for the first time and looking to deploy your resources somewhere?
Yeah, I don't know who you want to direct that one to.
Naomi, do you want to take a crack at it again?
I'm a little bit of a broken record, but I would start with the data and try and see and it depends how you're collecting. Even if you're collecting your data in an Excel spreadsheet, that's fine. To be able to just look at who doesn't stick around, how long do they stay before they stick around, where did they come from, what are some of their demographics, what are the types of visits that they were doing, try and see if we can see any patterns in there. That would be a really good place to start, so that you can have a hypothesis, and then you can come up with some intervention strategies. It doesn't have to involve sophisticated technology. This can be you can test some hypotheses that are really some gut feelings, with a few little in-house experiments, and then be able to move on to make some changes in your organization.
Thank you for fielding that one as well. I'm going to try to sneak in as many questions as I can here in the final 5 minutes or so. Aaron, I think this is a good question for you from your perspective at CareAcademy. Has any of your clients had success with using virtual reality when it comes to training programs and retaining employees?
Definitely an interesting concept to explore. Not really in a position to announce anything that we're doing today, but it's definitely, as the technology gets better and better, you can imagine a situation where for very specific types of training, you could potentially leverage virtual reality. There are a lot of issues, one of which is the cost of deploying VR technology. There's lots of people working on that challenge. Certainly, if you have if you deploy Oculus to everybody, then that could be great. So I think we're in the very early days, and I think we'll expect to see more from this in the coming 12 to 18 months. But it's definitely an interesting opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron. And let's see, it looks like we just had a poll pop up for our attendees. So if you had a second, please answer that and we will follow up with you. Let's try to sneak in maybe one more question. And Brett, let's direct this one to you. Do you think the loss of in-person relationship building, the move of hiring, onboarding, training to an online environment versus an in-person environment will ultimately contribute to churn, help with churn, or maybe kind of have a break-even effect?
I think it will help with churn because what I think previously a lot of companies were doing was, hey, this is how we interview, this is how we onboard, this is how we get you going, it's in person. When COVID came, we were forced to do it almost exclusively online, over video, and I think with the move back to some normalcy, if you have technology in place that allows you to do either, you can sort of cater to whatever experience the applicant is open to. So if you have an applicant that wants to be in person, come meet you, come to the office, and your office is open, great, offer that. But if you have an employee that is more concerned with safety and sees value in interviewing virtually, in onboarding remotely, if you have the technology in place, you can cater them too. So you can sort of take two different ways of hiring and cater to both ways. And in that, I think you can expand the number of applicants and the quality of applicants that you're seeing come across.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, we are about running out of time. Before we did wrap up, Aaron, Naomi, Brett, I first want to say thank you for your time today. I learned a lot, so I'm sure our attendees did as well. Any final comments or remarks that you'd like to make that you just really want to make sure that we sneak in there before saying goodbye?
I'll just say thanks for the opportunity. It was super interesting conversation. One of the stats that struck me from the survey was that 40% of folks think that training is key to retention, and I'm sort of thinking why it's not 100%. So I think it's a good start, but I think that there's talk about low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of opportunity in training strategies to help drive both recruiting and retention. Whether or not you use CareAcademy or any platform like ours, there's some great things that agencies can be doing and should be doing to drive that forward.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for your time. It was definitely nice getting to know you and what you're up to at CareAcademy a little bit more. Naomi, Brett, any final words of wisdom you'd like to leave our attendees here with?
I think we've talked a lot, in this industry, in this current situation, your people are your product, and your competitive advantage is going to come from people who are happy and want to work for you. So create an experience that they will enjoy, create an experience that they are eager to get into, and in that's how you win going forward. So great to be here. Bob, thank you for moderating this. It was a pleasure.
Likewise, nice to meet you as well. And Naomi, you'll have the final word today. Anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think it's just the old adage of what gets measured gets managed. So I think that you'll feel a lot more in control if if you're close to the numbers, because I feel like if you understand why some of this is happening, then you can really come up with your strategies to mitigate that. So that's almost like table stakes. Otherwise, some of your strategies are just it's like a shot in the dark. So I think that's just the starting point. And of course, it depends on different areas. It depends, geographically. But I know that we've learned tons about just by doing deep dives into the data. We've been able to really uncover some interesting patterns that we wouldn't have thought of in the past. So really, it's been a pleasure to be here and meet everybody. And thank you very much, Bob.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for all your insights. Just a final reminder for everyone tuning in, if you missed anything, we have you covered. You will be receiving a full recording of the webinar. A big thank you again to AlayaCare as well for bringing this fantastic conversation together. For everyone who wants to learn more about churn in 2021 and our employee retention survey report, stay tuned. That will be coming out very shortly. I'm HHCN editor Bob Holly. It's been a blast. Hope to see you all on our next discussion.